Hello my dear students, very good afternoon. We are here to discuss the Hindu dated March 24. I presume that you would have gone through the newspapers very well and you are raring to go. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platforms. Ensure that you share the program link with your friends so that more people can come and watch the program. Anyway, we are going to begin the Hindu dated March 24. As cases rise, the government gives note to inoculate all over 45 from April 1. Refund penal interest on EMIs, Supreme Court directs lenders. So let us go through these two things. Refund penal interest on EMIs, Supreme Court directs lenders. We know that during the COVID pandemic, the Reserve Bank of India permitted moratorium for 6 months from March 1, 2020 to April 31, 2020. 6 years moratorium was given. During the moratorium period, bank should not initiate any penal actions against the defaulters. So that was a great help for people who were forced to shut down their businesses. Cash inflow was not there, there was no revenue, no sales, nothing. So businesses all across India were struggling. But from September 1 onwards, when the moratorium ended, there was force on people who borrowed to repay the loans. Banks were forcing, and during the moratorium period, no loan below 2 crore should be imposed compound interest. That was what the directions given by the Supreme Court of India. Again, many people approached the court and asked for further moratorium, and the case was heard by the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court verdict said two things. One, during the moratorium period, no compound interest can be charged on loans whatever the limit of the loans be. Earlier on it was only for 2 crore, up to 2 crore there was no compound interest. Now even beyond 2 crore, whatever the nature of the loan be, whether it is a business loan or any kind of loan, compound interest should not be imposed. So that is a big relief. The government said that it cost 6,000 crore to for waiving compound interest up to 2 crore loans. Now since the relief has been given to all kinds of loans even beyond 2 crore, another 7,000 crore must be mobilized to provide this relief to borrowers. But Supreme Court one point very clear, that they would not intervene in matters of finance. That should be decided by the financial managers, not the Supreme Court. So Supreme Court in effect has asked the told the borrowers that they would not get the benefit of any further moratorium. Now banks can force borrowers to repay the loan immediately, otherwise their loans will be classified non-performing assets. All of a sudden their CIBIL score, Credit Bureau of India Limited, CIBIL, Credit Information Bureau, CIBIL and other credit information bureaus will immediately downgrade borrowers' borrowing capacity, CIBIL score will come down. So that will the borrowers will not be able to take fresh loans. So that will be a great troublesome time for borrowers who are already under peril. So Supreme Court directed banks and financial institutions to refund compound interest, interest on interest or penal interest collected on EMI for loans during the period of moratorium from March 1 to August 31. from March 1 to August 31, no penalty, nothing on EMI. It is directed that there shall not be any charge of interest on interest, compound interest or penal interest on for the period during the moratorium. During the moratorium period, the relief is given only for interest that is charged in a compounding manner. The court said the amounts accumulated as compound or penal interest or interest on interest during 6 months moratorium on EMI should be given as credit adjusted in the next installment of bank account. So, in the next installment it must be adjusted, that is what the Supreme Court direction. The judgment also spelt relief for banks and lenders, with the court lifting its nearly 6 months bar on them declaring accounts of borrowers as NPAs. Supreme Court had barred lenders and banks not to classify borrowers' accounts as NPA. That 6 months bar is taken off. Now banks are free to classify loans as NPA. It shows that NPA levels of banks are going to mount, and there will be huge pressure on borrowers applied by the banks in the days to come. Judgment concluded that government scheme to restrict waivers of interest on interest to loans worth up to 2 crore as irrational. Government gave relief only for loans with 2 crore limit or up to 2 crore limit. That is irrational. This scheme introduced in October was limited to debt in MSME, education, housing, consumer durables, credit card, auto, personal and consumption categories within 2 crore limit. So, the loan was this particular compound interest relief was given to only these categories of loans, and that too up to 2 crore limit. There is no justification shown to restrict the relief of not charging the interest on interest in respect to loans up to 2 crore only, and that too restricted to aforesaid 8 categories. There is no rationale to restrict such relief, said the Supreme Court, meaning there will be the relief of compound interest relief must be given to all borrowers irrespective of which category they belong to and irrespective of the loan limits. But the court refused to entertain complaints from petitioners that government did not do enough to ease the burden of financial strain during the pandemic. Okay, so on one side it is a relief to a small relief to borrowers, through the other side a big relief is given to lenders and financial institutions. They can classify their loans as NPA and they can start proceeding against the defaulted accounts. So, I think my students have understood the essence of this particular news. India abstains from UNHRC to vote on Sri Lanka. United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva. India did not vote against Sri Lanka. So, the resolution on promoting reconciliation, accountability and human rights in Sri Lanka was adopted after 22 states of the 44 member council voted in its favor. Colombo rejects move. Sri Lanka, which had earlier deemed the resolution politically motivated, was quick to reject UN move to collect and preserve evidence of war crimes in the country committed by armed forces and the LTTE. I shall tell you, ever since the late 1970s, there were political turbulence in Sri Lanka. The northern part of Sri Lanka, which is Tamil populated, they felt that they were politically degraded. So, Tamil political leadership alliances fought against keeping them as second grade citizens, and one of the organizations called the LTTE became very prominent, and they took arms to their hands and they fought the Sri Lankan forces. And this particular LTTE Sri Lankan struggle went for decades, and that ended only in 2010 when Velupulla Prabhakaran, LTTE's leader, was caught and shot to death by the Sri Lankan armed forces. During the Sri Lankan army LTT struggle, there were a lot of forced disappearances and human rights violation. This is what the United Nations Human Rights Commission Council in Geneva probing, and India abstained from voting. It is clear diplomacy that India does not want to provoke Sri Lanka. Anyway, the move was upheld, but Sri Lanka has said that this particular move is politically motivated. So, I hope I have briefly described that Sri Lankan crisis to you and you have understood. Corrective voice. The Supreme Court did well to lay down guidelines for the judiciary in dealing with cases of sexual crime. Recently, the Supreme Court of India has said that when cases on sexual crimes were heard by the courts, they have to the judges should not use stereotyped comments against women. While recognizing society's deep-rooted patriarchy and initiating a course correction in the way the judiciary itself views gender rights, the Supreme Court went back to Henrik Ibsen, a playwright known for his feisty women characters who break free of traditions of familial confines and notions of social propriety. See, listen, setting aside the absurd Ragi for bail order of Madhya Pradesh High Court to a sexual offender, we all know that case. The court ordered a sexual offender to wear a Rakhi on the victim's hand. So, these were absolute judicial abuses. So, by setting aside the absurd Rakhi for bail order, the Madhya Pradesh court to a sexual offender, the court issued a set of guidelines. The Supreme Court issued a set of guidelines on March 18 to be followed by the judiciary, by judicial officers while dealing with sexual crimes against women. Okay, so read this, you got the essence of things, that the Supreme Court has come out with a few guidelines, and the guidelines are given to judicial officers that they should not make stereotyped comments against women victims, and they have given clear-cut do's and don'ts to clear-cut guidelines regarding do's and don'ts to judicial officers. Myanmar junta defense crackdown. We know that Myanmar has been facing political insurgency following the military coup on February 1. On February 1, the military junta of Myanmar toppled the democratically elected government. They had asked the new government by the National League for Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi and the President Wilmayant, to probe election frauds which the military had charged, but the National League for Democracy and the government of Myanmar did not pay heed to military request, and on February 1, the military through a bloodless coup toppled the government, democratically elected government of Myanmar, and ever since then people have been protesting for bringing back democracy. They are protesting against Myanmar's military junta. Now the military and the police are doing searches on every house in Myanmar, and there is political uncertainties in Myanmar. Military junta defends the crackdown. Nearly 260 protesters died at the hands of the military and the police. 15 killed in huge Rohingya camp blaze in Bangladesh. 15 people died. Rohingya Muslims are refugees from Myanmar. They have been facing persecution at the hands of the military in Myanmar, and they have been running away from their place, and a few lakhs migrated to Bangladesh. Bangladesh government kept them in specific places, and in a fire, massive fire that ripped through one of the camps, Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh, at least 400 people are missing. Their plight, they are homeless people, they are nationless people, and humanity has left them to death, left them to dying. Israel voters take fourth shot at deciding Netanyahu's fate. Netanyahu is the longest serving Israeli Prime Minister. He has been in office for the past 12 years, and it is marred by corruption charges. Israel is going to poll, or has gone to poll, 4 times in less than 2 years. There is huge political uncertainties in Israel. Ready to discuss GST on fuel if states want it. Listen, we know that when the GST was introduced in India on July 1, 2017, petrol, diesel and other hydrocarbons were kept beyond the purview of GST. We know that GST, there are 4 tax rates that are applicable to GST. They are 5%, 12%, 18% and 28%. These are the 4 GST slabs. Most of the goods are covered under any of these slabs. And there are 3 more rates: 0% rate for milk and eggs, for example, 0%, and 3% for gold, and there are certain prohibitive goods that would attract 28% plus, sin goods, I would say. So these are the different slabs, but petrol and diesel are not under the purview of GST. So if they are included in the GST, then the states and the central government will not be able to increase the central government taxes. So that will come under the purview of the GST Council. So had it been under GST, then the maximum rate applied would have been 28%, or sometimes maybe a few more percent. But governments, whether the central government or the state governments, would not have been able to increase the taxes as and when they wished, as it is happening now. Now we know that when the diesel prices, international prices are coming down, but still we are paying very high price for petrol and diesel. And during the time of the pandemic, the petrol prices, international prices went down to below $20 per barrel, but immediately the central government increased the excise duty, so we had to pay more price despite the daily falling of international oil prices. So recently the Finance Minister of India made a comment that the government was ready to bring it under GST. Now the central government says, okay, they are ready to talk to states, and if the states are willing, they are ready to bring it under GST. So the central government is trying to put it on the state governments for not demanding to bring the petrol prices under GST. If they are put under GST, there are 2 benefits for corporations. One, tax slabs will not be altered as and when the governments like, number 1. Number 2, they will be able to take input tax credit for the money spent on petrol and diesel. Of course, in what way it is going to happen, if at all the government is willing to bring it under GST, is something we have to wait and see. Bank stocks rally after Supreme Court verdict on moratorium. Of course, it was a great relief, as I told you in the beginning. Supreme Court said that banks can proceed against the defaulters for their loan becoming sick, and once Supreme Court ruled that part of its verdict in favor of the banks, all of a sudden bank stocks started rallying. So equity indices regained their footing on Tuesday, propelled by banking stocks, which surged after the Supreme Court declined to extend the loan moratorium period and said complete waiver of interest was not possible. So Supreme Court said complete waiver of loans would not be possible, that would have affected banks' profitability, and moratorium period cannot be extended. These were two rulings in favor of banks, then all of a sudden bank stocks have started surging. Thank you very much, my dear students. I hope whatever things I pointed out you have understood. So, during the program, if you have doubts, you may please post your doubts. I shall try to comment. Tomorrow again at the same time I shall come with the March 25 Hindu News Daily paper. Make sure that you read the papers and come for the program. So, at 3 o'clock we will have another session on either math, QA or reasoning. Await that. Thank you very much. Goodbye.